On today's show, Houston Rockets free agency targets and rumors, how to address the Houston Rockets' distinct lack of shooting on this roster, which players fit this team, this identity best, and who should the Rockets be pursuing this offseason. All that and so much more on today's Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. That's the best way you can help our show out, is to comment anything below the YouTube video. I want your thoughts on who the Rockets should be pursuing in free agency this offseason. But if you don't want to do all that, just go type Go Rockets. It helps us out a ton. Now, today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, which helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for being an everydayer and making the show part of your day every single day. We're going to pivot away from our draft coverage here momentarily, as NBA free agency is just under a month away, and this Houston Rockets team does have some pressing needs. So we're going to put pause on the speculation and what the Houston Rockets could be doing with that number 3 overall selection in the draft, and we're going to focus on what the Rockets can do via free agency to address some of the holes in this roster. And the biggest need here hasn't changed. We've talked about it before. This Rockets team needs shooting. Now, I'll preface this by saying that you're not going to fix the shooting woes of this team with one free agency sign. Hell, you're not going to fix it with 2 free agency signings, okay? The Rockets were 23rd in the NBA in three-point percentage this past season, while also being 12th in the NBA in three-point attempts per game. Now, that number did jump up a little bit because, again, for the first half of the season, or maybe even 2/3 of the season, it felt like the Rockets were kind of stuck in the 90s, playing a very old school brand of basketball, not prioritizing the 3 ball nearly as much as we've been accustomed to seeing from this Houston Rockets team over the last couple decades or so. And they need shooters, right? That you can't get by without it in the modern NBA. Shooting is always a premium. So I will say, though, for this team to get to where they want to be next year, you're going to need internal growth from a lot of guys in regards to their shooting, right? Alperen Sengun has to become a better shooter. Jalen Green has to become a better shooter. Jabari took a step up in his shooting this past season, but he needs to become a more consistent shooter, because there were some games where he just couldn't hit anything and other games where he was lights out, knocking down everything, right? So less streakiness, needs to be more consistent with his shooting. Getting Tari, Eason back in the rotation will help quite a bit. Thompson really needs to become at least a semi-serviceable outside three-point shooter, right? Because the times where he was left wide open did kind of muck things up offensively for this Rockets team. So across the board, they need internal development in the shooting department to become a better team next season, but they can also nudge themselves in the right direction by pursuing and potentially picking up a free agent or two that give them a dimension that they don't currently have, right? Which is a knockdown, dead-eye three-point shooter, somebody that can, ideally clock in, come in off the bench, and start filling it up, right? And space the floor, open things up for Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun offensively. And there are a lot of names on the free agency marketplace this offseason that kind of fit the bill. And I have them here broken up on today's show into kind of lower tier players, mid tier players, and high end kind of players that the Rockets could be or should be pursuing in free agency this offseason. I guess I just couldn't get away from our draft profile format, where we've got the NBA comps and we've got the low, mid, and high end outcomes for these NBA draft prospects. So I figured we would kind of stick with it here for the speculation on the Rockets free agency pursuits. And what I want to start with is just the low end guys, because these guys are going to be real quick hitters. The NBA has evolved away from the idea of guys who are kind of shooting specialists, quote unquote. The days of, the Steve Novaks of the NBA or the Jason Caponos of the NBA, whatever, are far and gone. But there are still guys that kind of fit that mold where shooting is the skill that they mainly bring to the table. And unfortunately, not a ton else, right? So the two names that I have on kind of the low tier potential free agency targets for the Rockets to consider are Luke Kennard with the Memphis Grizzlies and Buddy Hield coming off of a contract with the Philadelphia 76ers. So let's start with Buddy Hield really quick. He's coming off a $23.5 million deal, expired contract with the 76ers. He's 31 years old, shot 38.5% from three this past season, averaged about 12 points per contest. The thing with Buddy Hield, and hell, Rockets former general manager Daryl Morey kind of alluded to this in his exit press conferences after the 76ers season was over, is that things didn't quite work with Buddy Hield in Philadelphia. And Daryl actually owned up to that. He was like, I misread that situation. I thought he would be a good addition to this team, and we just never really found a way to implement him or to get him out there and working with, Joel, with Maxey, the way that we thought it would work on paper. And that's the problem here is it's not 2K, right? You can't just plug in a shooter and expect him to average 20 plus a game because, his 3-point percentage looks great. So Buddy Hield, that's what he does, though. He is a shooter. He is a floor spacer, but he doesn't bring a ton else to the table, right? Yes, he's a knockdown dead-eye shooter. Yes, he will let that thing fly, but, so-so defender, not really super great at putting the ball on the floor, not great attacking off the catch. Like, there's just not a ton else that Buddy Hield really brings to the table. So is that the guy that you'd be comfortable with committing the MLE to? Because that's what the Rockets have to work with this offseason. I kind of jumped the gun there a little bit, but they do have their non-taxpayer MLE to pursue any of these potential free agency targets, which again clocks in at just under $13 million right out of the gate. But if they wanted to go with the maximum value of this offseason's MLE, I believe it's up to 4 years and approximately $55 million is the most that they could sign a player to using this offseason's mid-level or non-taxpayer mid-level exception. So Buddy Hield would be taking a little bit of a pay cut if he were to do that. But let's face it, Buddy Hield's probably not a $20 million player. He's probably not even a $15 million player at this stage in his career. But what he could be, right, is he could be the guy that the Rockets, float the MLE to or a portion of the MLE, maybe not the whole MLE, and kind of he would fill that kind of Reggie Bullock role on the bench, right? That serviceable 3-point outside shooting threat. Check him into a game. If he's hot, cool, maybe let him, get him some second half run, that kind of thing. If not, then you don't go back to him. This second guy here is kind of similar thing, right? Luke Kennard. That's kind of now Luke Kennard, a little bit more adept at putting the ball on the floor and making something happen. He's got his little, pull up game. He's got a little bit more JJ Redick to his game than Buddy Hield does about being able to kind of come off screens really quickly, catching and shooting. But both of these guys, motion shooters. Luke Kennard, a little bit more adept at putting the ball on the floor and making something happen with it, kind of using that shooting gravity that he has, coming off screens, that kind of thing. But unfortunately, Luke Kennard actually is coming off of it. Well, is not a guaranteed unrestricted free agent. He has a team option with the Grizzlies for this next season at $14 million. So will the Grizzlies decline his team option? Will they pick it up? Kind of TBD on that front. But if the Grizzlies do decline his team option, I mean, he's a guy, he's 28 years old, shot 45% from three, averaged 11 points per game. He's a guy that can, he could rack up a couple DNPs here or there. And then when you need him, when you need the 3-point shooting in a given matchup or, against a specific team, maybe, then he's the guy you can go to and say, hey, we need to plug you into the game. Go get us some buckets, go space the floor for us, that kind of thing. So those are my two candidates on the Rockets kind of short list of possible free agency targets on the low end of names that they should be or could be pursuing this offseason. Coming up, want to get to our mid-tier players on the list before we work our way up to the high-end outcomes, because I've got a creative little, a trade, in fact, that the Rockets could potentially be pursuing down the line. We're going to get to some of the reporting as well on some of these names, some of what I'm hearing about what the Rockets are hoping to be able to do this offseason. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Because LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals that you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all of that while making the process easy and intuitive, because LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or the resources to hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, where we are about to discuss our mid-tier Houston Rockets shooting free agent targets. But before we do, I just want to emphasize here that, and we've had this very conversation before, but it's important to note that this is a Rockets team that kind of feels like they've got their top 9 kind of locked in for next season, barring any significant changes to the roster, right? Their starting lineup more than likely going to be the same next year unless they make a massive trade or kind of swing for the fences somehow. So that's Fred, Jalen, Dillon, Jabari, and Sengun. And then off the bench, you've got your dynamic duo of Thompson, Cam Whitmore, the rookie sensations, Tari, Eason coming back from injury, and Steven Adams also coming back from injury, who are both still, on track to be ready and healthy for training camp and no setbacks as far as their rehabilitation process, at least that I'm aware of. So how do you factor in potentially a 10th rotation guy, right? Who are you willing to take minutes away from to be able to squeeze another guy into the Rockets rotation? Do you take him away from Jalen? Do you take him away from Fred, from Amin or Cam, who probably deserve even more minutes after their play in their rookie season, right? So it becomes a really delicate balance of trying to find the right candidate who would be willing to maybe not step into a massive role with this Rockets team. More or less, you want a guy that's going to be able to step in and fill that kind of Aaron Holiday or Reggie Bullock role from this past season, where they're your 10th, 11th, 12th guy on the roster. But the flip side of that coin is it's really tough to stomach the idea of paying $13 million a year for potentially multiple years to a guy who's going to be racking up a lot of DNPs potentially, because it seems like the Rockets have a really strong 9-man rotation already in place ahead of whoever they may pursue in free agency, as well as the fact that, again, they want to get some of their impact players as many minutes as possible. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some of these mid-tier guys. So the first guy that I have here on our mid-tier list is Malik Beasley, who just spent this past season with the Milwaukee Bucks as their starting 2-guard in the backcourt with Damian Lillard. And Beasley had a really solid year. He's coming off of a $15 million deal. He's 27 and a half years old. He shot 41.3% from long distance this past year, averaged a little over 11 points per contest. And I think Beasley is probably a step up from a couple of the names that we talked about there in segment 1. A little bit more creation ability off the bounce, a more serviceable defender than Kennard or Buddy Hield. And a little wrinkle here to consider is that Malik Beasley and Cam Whitmore actually share the same trainer, Aaron Miller. So there is, a small connection there. And, sometimes when you look at these guys, you'll start looking at, okay, which guys who shares agents, who shares trainers, who kind of, occupies the same social circles. And with the reporting done via The Athletic recently that the Rockets are interested in pursuing Malik Beasley, I do wonder if there's anything, of note there in that connection that could potentially prove beneficial as far as just, Cam kind of talking up the Rockets and Malik wanted to move to a different situation. Obviously, it's tough to want to leave the Bucks, right? The Bucks are still a really strong team, one of the East's contenders year in, year out. And the idea of playing alongside Giannis Antetokounmpo and getting some of the easiest shots of your career is a really appealing position to be in. But the Bucks are also one of the teams in salary cap hell. So maybe they don't want to re-sign him. Maybe this is a situation where, unlike with Brook Lopez, where the Rockets tried to throw their weight around with their salary cap, with the money that they had last offseason pursuing Brook Lopez, maybe they're able to offer, their non-taxpayer MLE, that $13 million a year. Maybe that's a little too rich for the Bucks to consider keeping Malik Beasley on at this point. Now, again, it would be a slight pay cut if you're Malik Beasley coming to the Houston Rockets, because again, the MLE is a little under $13 million a year starting out. But to be able to come to Houston, a nice up-and-coming team, Ime Udoka, a coach that a lot of players would love to play for, there might be enough of an allure there to draw him away from Milwaukee, especially if you give him long-term consideration. That's the other part, is for a lot of these free agents, right? The Rockets could try to float these 1 year, 2 year deals, or 1 year and then a second year with like a team option or something. Those contracts are not as great, not as appealing for some of these free agents. Whereas if you came in strong with a 3-year deal or a 4-year deal for a guy that you think is going to age really well into that contract and have a lot of value as the NBA salary cap continues to increase, then maybe it becomes a little bit more of an appeasing offer for a guy like Malik Beasley. So that's one of the mid-tier possibilities. Next on the mid-tier list, Gary Trent Jr. So Gary Trent Jr., having just spent his past season with the Toronto Raptors, I like Gary Trent Jr. a lot. I think he provides a more dynamic kind of scoring punch rather than just being a knockdown three-point shooter, which he did shoot 39.3% this past season from long distance, averaging just under 14 points per contest. He's also a little bit younger at just 25 years old. So Gary Trent Jr., a name that I like a lot. And he's in a situation, this is probably one of the names on the list that he's not in a good situation, right? Toronto is, I wouldn't say rudderless, but they are a team kind of at the bottom of the NBA scrap heap right now as far as relevancy goes, whereas the Rockets are one of the teams kind of blossoming before our eyes and hopefully looking to get back to a place of relevance as soon as this next season with, making a playoff berth, play-in berth, that kind of thing. So Gary Trent Jr. going from a bad situation to a much better situation, one that is currently on the rise, could be a really appealing outcome for him. And again, I just like that what he brings to the table as far as a more dynamic scoring punch rather than just being a spot-up three-point shooter or just a guy who can catch and shoot and not do much else with the ball, like those first couple guys, Kennard and Buddy Hield there in segment one. So I like Gary Trent Jr. Now, he is coming off of a $17.2 million deal. Now, are there any other teams out there in the NBA landscape that are going to be trying to cough up, 15 million plus, 20 million plus for guys like Malik Beasley, guys like Gary Trent Jr.? Possibly, but there's going to be some names further up the list, free agents that are probably going to be slightly higher priority for teams out there like the Philadelphia 76ers, who have cap space, or like the Orlando Magic, who also desperately need outside shooting and also have cap space to play with, right? They have been linked to a couple like Klay Thompson has been linked to the Orlando Magic as a possible free agent landing spot for him. Paul George is another one, right? Elite shooter, still a star level player. So all these teams that do have cap space this offseason are going to do their due diligence on the top targets before they start working their way down the list. But if you're the Rockets and if you're being opportunistic, while those teams are prioritizing the upper echelon free agents, maybe you can drop one tier lower and go for some of these middle of the pack guys and be able to walk away with a guy that you feel really confident about while everybody else is duking it out for the top tier free agents at the top of the list. The last guy that I have here on the mid-tier outcome is actually Alec Burks with the New York Knicks. Now, Alec Burks is a lot older than a lot of the other players kind of on this list. He's almost 33 years old. He's coming off a season where he shot 37.5% from three, averaging just over 10 points a game. The thing about Alec Burks, and this is important to consider when you're thinking about all these players that we're talking about in today's show, is how would they fit this Rockets identity, right? Do they fit into an Ime Udoka team construct, right? With a defense first mentality, all of that. And we know that Alec Burks is probably the best or second best defender on this list of names that I have kind of compiled for us here to discuss on today's show. We know that he comes from a Tibbs system, right? He's not afraid of playing defense. And Burks is one of those like I saw somebody say this the other day and I can't get it out of my head, is like, I cannot take credit for this. It's not an original thought, but somebody said something along the lines of Alec Burks is like if somebody was like designing a superstar from scratch or somebody was trying to load a superstar from scratch and it got stuck at like 80%. Because some of the buckets that Alec Burks gets, some of the ways that he scores the ball is just absolutely sensational, right? He can go off on a tear and single-handedly win you a game if he gets hot. So that kind of player, that kind of like injury insurance policy to be able to throw in the rotation, a veteran who kind of understands his role. And again, guys that are a little bit longer in the tooth there are probably more accepting of a role where they don't have a guaranteed spot in the rotation where maybe he could, rack up a few DNPs here and there before Ime calls his number for a specific matchup, or if there's a guy missing some time, out of the main rotation, that kind of thing. So that's something to consider as far as Alec Burks is concerned. So we've got 5 names down on the list. I've got 2 more names to go. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, where I have to apologize because as I was teasing this final segment, I got my numbers wrong. I've actually got 3 names for this final segment as our like high-end, top-end potential free agency outcomes for the Houston Rockets, candidates that they should be pursuing this offseason. And the first name of which that I want to get to here is actually a should have been, would have been Houston Rocket, and that is actually DeAnthony Melton. So coming off a contract with the Philadelphia 76ers, he's coming off of an $8.6 million deal. He's only 26 years old, shot 36% from 3, averaged about 11 points per game. But the thing about Melton is he's not maybe on the same level as, knockdown, lights out 3-point shooter, some of the other guys on this list, but he is easily the best defender of this entire bunch. DeAnthony Melton would give the Rockets yet another elite point of attack defender. He would give the Rockets, another ball handler, a guy that can, handle the rock in a pinch. He's not, a guy that you really want being your primary table setter or anything. But I do think that DeAnthony Melton is absolutely an Ime Udoka type of player. I think he would thrive with this Houston Rockets team. And especially as we saw this past season, with Jalen Green continuing to take on more of a primary initiator, primary ball handler role, with Alperen Sengun being entrusted to run more and more of the offense last season, I do think that it's going to be important to be able to put pieces around those guys that can thrive and complement those guys perfectly. And DeAnthony Melton is exactly the type of guard that would complement Jalen Green, because there is a world where down the line, maybe Jalen Green is just the Rockets' primary ball handler, right? Maybe Fred VanVleet goes and does whatever after his contract's up in Houston. Maybe they don't want to keep him long term. Who knows what the future holds there? But if there is a world where Jalen becomes the Rockets' primary initiator, you're going to want a guard who can play off ball to him and still be a really impactful piece without needing to have the ball in his hands. And that's exactly who DeAnthony Melton is, right? He is a phenomenal point of attack defensive piece, a lot of length, great size. He's only 6'2", but great wingspan, great ability to play passing lanes, elite defensive presence, right? Add him into the lineup next to Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, right? Perfect complementary piece. Question remains, right? What are the 76ers going to do as far as, are they going to pay him? Are they going to let him walk? Is he going to test the waters in free agency and see what he's able to kind of come away with? He's a guy that I would easily feel comfortable about locking up long-term The problem is I do think he might be just outside of the Rockets' kind of financial range because, again, they've only got the non-taxpayer MLE to work with. And I could very easily see a team willing to pay, anywhere in that $15 to $20 million range for De'Anthony Melton, especially with the NBA salary cap continuing to increase over these next few years with the new TV rights deals and everything coming in. There's a world where De'Anthony Melton could easily get $20 million plus this offseason. Now, the Sixers are in a weird spot where they do have the ability to pursue a max contract level free agent this offseason. They've been linked to Paul George is one of the names. They've been linked to Klay Thompson. There's a lot of names that the Sixers have been linked to this offseason. They're going to have to take care of kind of financially maneuvering with the cap space that they have to work with before coming back and re-signing their own free agents to, ballooning their contracts and potentially going even further past their respective cap holds this offseason. So that's one name to consider. I really like the idea of adding De'Anthony Melton to this roster. Think of a more like a souped up version of Aaron Holiday, right? Aaron Holiday was really serviceable this past season for the Rockets. And especially on a vet minimum deal, like insane value for Aaron Holiday. In fact, I'd go so far as to say bring Aaron Holiday back would be a strong move if they strike out in free agency elsewhere with kind of a bigger name or a better player. But De'Anthony Melton would be like thinking of a lineup where you have De'Anthony Melton and Amin Thompson and Tari Eason and Jabari and Dillon Brooks, like an all defensive lineup out there to just shut down a team. Playing for Ime Udoka, that would be something crazy to witness. So, like the idea of De'Anthony Melton here. I'm going to get a little wacky here, so you need to bear with me on this one. Malik Monk, who's coming off of a fantastic season with the Sacramento Kings, where he was arguably the Kings, for stretches of their season, second best player, at least third best player, like behind De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis for sure. But there were definitely stretches where he was the Kings' second best player this past season. He is getting a fat payday though. Malik Monk, they were even joking about it right in like his exit press conference where De'Aaron Fox was like, I forget what little like throwaway comment he had, but he was like, get that bag or whatever. He knows that Monk is probably as good as gone and that he's going to go get a payday somewhere else. And the Kings probably aren't going to be the team that gives him that payday, unfortunately. So I do wonder, and again, the Rockets don't have the financial means to give Monk a 20 million, 25, whatever $1 million contract right out of the gate. However, what they could do, now walk with me here, rather than the Sacramento Kings losing Malik Monk for absolutely nothing, there could be a world where a sign and trade would be really beneficial for both teams, and the piece that you could send back to the Kings could be Dillon Brooks, because the Rockets are kind of already in a little bit, I wouldn't say, actually, yeah, I'd go so far as to say they're in a little bit of a logjam where, at your wing spot at a minimum this next season, you've got Dillon Brooks, Jabari Smith Jr., and Tari Eason. Those three guys, if they're all getting 36 minutes a night, that's it. That's all the minutes you have for your three wing spots, right? For your 3/4 spots on the court. And we know that Dillon Brooks, he's got 3 years left on his deal, and I feel like he served his purpose here in year one, but how much time is going to go by before Rockets fans are clamoring for Tari Eason to start over Dillon Brooks, right? I'd argue that there were points last season, even with Tari playing on a bum leg, that he was maybe more impactful than Dillon Brooks. We know that internally the Rockets are, that Tari Eason ranks at the top of the Rockets board as far as just player impact ratings. And how highly they value him. He is the future heir to that, what feels like that small forward spot in a Rockets jersey. So if you could have the opportunity to potentially flip Dillon Brooks into a signed and traded Malik Monk, where he's making 20, 25 million a year, whatever the Kings can sign him up to, and then move off of that contract, the Kings get a very serviceable rotation piece back, a starting level rotation piece back. So you could either if you're the Kings, you could bring Dillon Brooks off the bench or inject him into that starting lineup. Now, because the Sacramento Kings would be facilitating the sign and trade for the Rockets, I feel like you'd have to send something of value back to the Kings to make it worth their while. They wouldn't just do it for Dillon Brooks. At that point, is it what else would you attach to the deal? Would it be enough to include a couple second rounders? Would it need to be a future first rounder? Like what would you need to give of value back to Sacramento? Or arguably, would it just be enough value to be able to give the Kings another high quality rotation player instead of losing Monk for absolutely nothing? Who knows there? It's a little bit of a weird one. I need to see what teams are actively pursuing Malik Monk this offseason before kind of gauging whether the Rockets can get themselves involved in the mix there. But sign and trade possibilities like that are always really interesting. And again, the Rockets have Dillon Brooks for the next 3 years, and I would be utterly shocked if Dillon Brooks plays all 3 of those years in a Houston Rockets jersey. I do think that that's probably the Rockets contract that is going to be most likely included in a lot of, big time trade scenarios as kind of the salary ballast, or that's really realistically the piece, or the position on this Rockets roster that makes the most sense to try and upgrade. Now, this wouldn't be a direct upgrade because you're not going to trade Dillon Brooks and throw Malik Monk into the starting lineup. But what you could do is you trade Dillon Brooks for Malik Monk. He becomes your de facto immediate 6th man coming off the bench, very similar to the role that he had in Sacramento. But he gets the payday if Sacramento doesn't want to keep him, keep him there. And then the Rockets would then be able to open up all those minutes and throw Tari Eason into the starting lineup. They'd have more minutes for Cam Whitmore to play on the wing. And then Malik Monk becomes your kind of tertiary guard behind Fred VanVleet and Jalen Green. And then that becomes your really heavy locked in guard rotation, is those 3 guys. And then Cam Whitmore kind of slides up a little bit, and Cam Whitmore and Amin Thompson occupy those extra wing minutes that can be split, whatever's left over after Tari Eason and Jabari Smith Jr. So something like 18, 20 minutes a night for each of those guys, potentially, maybe a little more, depending on how much Monk and VanVleet and Jalen Green are playing in a given matchup, a given game. So I'm really gung-ho about that one. I think it has some legs to it. So I'm curious your thoughts. The final name that I have here before we wrap things up, he's an old fan favorite.
Oh, my.
Eric Gordon, who I know for a fact loves Houston from the bottom of his heart. Like, he still considers Houston home. He just built a house here recently before the Rockets moved on from him. He loves Houston. He still has a really strong relationship with the Rockets front office, with their brain trust. And the situation in Phoenix is less than ideal. He has a player option on his contract, and I would honestly love that. That would be one name that I would be really content with if the Rockets wanted to throw, the entire MLE or most of it at Eric Gordon to bring him back to Houston on, 2-3 year deal, whatever, so that he can ride off into the sunset and be that piece for the Rockets. Because while Eric is not a true lights out 3-point shooter, he's a high volume 3-point shooter, and he's a combo guard, right? He can run the offense in a pinch. You can play through him. He is a very serviceable, not even a serviceable defender. He's a good defender, right? When he's locked in and engaged, EG is a fantastic defender. He's familiar with Houston. He's familiar with the young guys on this roster. He knows, he's been there through the bad times with them, and him coming back and the Rockets kind of like, bringing EG back in the fold, I think would be a great like kind of coming home story for him to have been through not 1, not 2, but 3 different eras of Houston Rockets basketball. I feel like he'd probably be open to the idea of it, especially with how, precarious the situation is in Phoenix. So that's my final name to include here as a potential free agency candidate. And I included it in the high end outcome because, again, Eric Gordon would fit this Rockets roster perfectly across the board with his entire skill set, everything he brings to the table. And I think he would thrive with this current version of this Rockets team, playing alongside Jalen Green, Alperen, Sengun, the new and improved, the leveled up versions of these guys with the new expectations. He would be a great complementary piece next to Fred VanVleet in the backcourt. I think it would be, it almost makes too much sense for the Rockets to at least hit up EG's phone and just be like, hey man, do you want to come back to Houston? I'd love to see an Eric Gordon return. How would you feel about the Rockets bringing home Eric Gordon? I want you to let me know in the YouTube comments. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts, or on YouTube, just search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe. Who do you think should be at the top of the Houston Rockets free agency priority list? Let me know in those YouTube comments. Which of these names we talked about on today's show would you be most intrigued by? Again, I've got my top end guys right there, and maybe the Malik Monk one is a little fishy, but I had to get a little creative with one of them. But let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.